afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. So, welcome to our 5th community learning session with Daisy Maldonado, Youth Development Through Employment. My name is Lori Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of Engaged New Mexico, and happy to see you all here. Just before we get started, we have a few housekeeping pieces. So we're cramming a lot of information into a 1-hour period with these learning sessions. So we try to be as efficient as possible. If you could, just for the sake of knowing who's here with us, if you could just do a quick introduction in the chat, your name, your organization, your role, if you're so inclined. And then that way we can get a sense for who's in the room, the virtual room with us. Just by way of information, to remind everyone that your mics will be muted during the presentation portion of the session. You can be unmuted for the Q&A, and so we'll ask people generally to save questions for the end. But if you do need clarification along the way while the presenter is talking, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And then also, again, because we're typically cramming a lot into 1 hour, if you can, when we're doing the discussion part in Q&A, if you can keep your questions, comments to roughly 1 to 2 minutes, just to make sure that everyone who has questions or comments has a chance to speak. So please feel free to speak up by all means, but just be aware of the time. So we will have someone acting as timekeeper to keep us on task. So if you hear the bell or a phone alarm going off, that means try to wrap up pretty quickly. And I think that is it. So we're seeing people's introductions coming in the chat. Awesome. Good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us today and giving us an hour of your time so we can all learn together. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Abir Aldawi, our Assistant Director. Take it away, Abir.
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our 5th community learning session. We started these community sessions as a result of the wonderful feedback and discussions that we had at the November 2021 Kindergarten Through Career Coalition launch of the Success Partnership. We're hosting these learning sessions because we know that there are people within our community who are working on innovative solutions in the K-12, post-secondary, and workforce arenas. And it is the goal of the Kindergarten Through Career Coalition to identify and unify those efforts and initiatives to have a profound collective impact on our society and to bring them to the forefront and hopefully create meaningful partnerships within the coalition and outside of the coalition. So with that, I'll turn it over to Candace Jacuniak, who will introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Today, we will be hearing from Daisy Maldonado, the Director of the Empowerment Congress of Doña Ana County. Daisy earned a bachelor's degree in both communication studies and government, followed by a master's degree in economics with a minor in applied statistics from New Mexico State University. She is an experienced educator, advocate, facilitator, administrative, and organizational development professional. During her 19 years living in southern New Mexico, she has been an advocate for community programs and organizations that put people at their center and shift power to those most impacted by unjust systems. Daisy joined the Empowerment Congress in 2018 as its coordinator, where she developed its community leadership program, Cultivating Leadership for Social Justice. Now as the director, Maldonado is further expanding the work of Empowerment Congress to reach more families and youth within Doña Ana County, Colonias, with the goal of supporting community leaders to exercise their agency, take ownership of their communities, and lead decision-making processes. At this point, I will turn it over to you, Daisy. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for the invitation. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so I will start that process. And of course, we know Zoom is oh so fun sometimes. Let's see, let me make this bigger. There we go. How does that work? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so thanks. I'm gonna do something similar that I did at a presentation back in November. So if you all were part of my session, it's a little bit of a repeat, but I think it's worthwhile to have this discussion about youth development and youth employment. That's, Empowerment Congress has this, or, this is when it first started in particular, was developing youth in high school. Because it definitely felt that it was worthwhile. And that's just a segment of our population that, there's just lots of opinions about young, about teens and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, and how we educate them. And so Empowerment Congress has taken the stance of obviously empowerment, right? So not only of adults, but also of our young people. And that includes trusting them, right? And that includes asking for their opinions, and that includes having them at decision-making tables. And for some people, that's a little controversial. But I really wanted to talk about today, though, is while we're developing our youth and we're engaging them in activities and their high schools and their middle schools, how does employment come into the picture? And we have youth that many times, they're employed because of different reasons. They want to spend money, or they have to because of their family situations. But before we get into that, I really wanted to turn the tables on you all and see if we could think back, or if you could think back to your high school years. What did you do for work? Or did you even have a job? How many hours did you work? How much, or what did you, ask how much money you made. Don't worry, we won't. I won't ask that question. But what did you use the money for? And then what did you learn from it? So I just want to take a few minutes, maybe like 5 minutes of silence, if that's okay. And I just want you to think back. You can jot stuff down if you want. But really think about it. Like what was the work that you did? And in particular also, how did you spend that money? And so then why was it important for you to have that job? So, and also just. Maybe we didn't need 5 minutes. We'll take 1 more minute though, if you want to think about it. And I would love to hear from several folks and just share what they did during their teen years.
Daisy, you want people to go ahead and share out?
Yeah, if folks are ready, then definitely they can, popcorn style, even though we're in the Zoom world. Does anybody want to volunteer first? Talk about their high school or teen. Okay, Stephanie. Got her
Hey,
hand up.
everybody, my computer's been giving me some issues, so I was trying to do the camera thing earlier, so my apologies. But this is something that's really cool because one, I did work while I was in high school. I actually worked while I was very young. I think it was just something of my upbringing. So I worked at my first job that was like official. I would say my first job was at Albertsons, actually on North Main, and I was a courtesy clerk. So paper, plastic, putting back all the little go backs. And I would have to say that that had to have been like, well, you don't want to say the best job ever, but it was like a cool job while I was in high school. It obviously worked with my school schedule, so I could just go after school in the weekends. You worked with other peers around your same age, like we were all the same age doing the same courtesy clerk kind of stuff. Money, the reason I guess was more so because I was getting older and not to throw out too much of my family info, but we kind of just had to fend for ourselves, single parent mom. She wasn't the best example, but I knew I had to make my own money. I knew I had to save was a big thing. And honestly, it was, if I wanted something, I had to work for it. So going to winter ball or any of those special cool school things, that's what I had to work for. So it was really, if I wanted something, I had to work for it. And it taught me just resist. It teaches you to get your act together when you have to, but it's those basic responsibilities. You learn to save, you learn how to be on time, you learn how to just work hard. At that point you're a high school kid, so you don't have all this like education, but you have your work ethic, and you have your personality, and you have like these skills that you don't know until you start to kind of put yourself out there. And then in the work I do right now with my AmeriCorps members, they're not working, they're service providers. But for a lot of these young people now, I don't think they work as young as they used to. And they come to me with no skills of a job, and I think that that's kind of like, kids should be working. If you're old enough to drive, you should get a job. I feel it just teaches basic life skills and responsibility, but money management, and getting yourself out into the real world, but also just what is it that you like to do? I am a people person, so I was very lucky that my first job was somewhere where I got to talk and interact, but not everybody is like that. Maybe you're more, to yourself. So you need to find something that's, just the skills that are for you. So yeah, I thought this was really cool that you asked these questions, and it really did get me thinking of the jobs I've done from when I was younger to today. So yeah, that was really cool.
Thanks, Stephanie. Does anybody else want to share? I'd like to hear at least from 2 more people, because we all have different experiences, right? Okay, Liz, I see your hand. Let's hear it.
I spent most of my teenage years in a small town. So I basically, from the age of 11 to 15, did lots of babysitting. And that was for bus money, so that I could actually get away from my house on my own and go shopping. And I hate to say it, but what I spent my money on between 11 and 15, besides bus money, were comics and shoes. Because like the young lady that just spoke, if I wanted anything beyond the basics that my parents could afford, because I was one of 6 children, you had to go find the money somehow. So that's what I did with babysitting. And then I segued at age 15 into being both a sales clerk and a soda jerk in this small town's pharmacy. And so because it was kind of that on the cusp of that going into the time of learning to drive, etc., I was saving money for gas and whatever damages I might incur in future as a new driver. And I was also still involved with Girl Scouting as a senior scout. So I needed money for all the activities associated with that, as well as school. And again, clothes figured in there. But the biggest thing for me was having enough funds from work to get the music that I really like. I'm a very eclectic person with music, have been since I was young, and top 40 radio stations in the 1950s and 60s was not very eclectic. You didn't have much FM where I live. So that's what I spent my money on, was vinyl. And that's it.
Awesome, thank you. And then
guys.
one other person. Okay, go ahead. Someone that started talking. No? Okay, Alma, you can go ahead.
I wasn't sure if you were calling on me or not because I'm trying to manage the Zoom on my cell phone. So as a teenager, my very first job was at the WIC office. I got like a summer job through a program at Gadsden High School. So I worked there maybe like 15 hours a week. I only worked there for about a month, just doing office tasks, answering phones, taking messages. And then also after that, I worked cleaning somebody's house. My dad was a gardener, so he is still a gardener. And so then he hooked me up with the job with one of his clients, and I'd go and clean their house like 2 or 3 times a week. And the reason I started working cleaning the house was because I had a child. So I had my first child when I was 16. And so then I really wanted to get a job so that I could provide for my child. And so I lived with my parents and was single. So that was the main reason that I started working. And that was at Subway. So then I did the very first job I mentioned. I didn't have my kid yet. And then I had my daughter. So then I cleaned houses. I worked at Subway. And so that's what I used my money on. But not only that, so I paid really for everything that my child needed as far as like diapers and clothes and all that. And that was my senior year of high school. So I also bought my own prom dress and my clothes. And also I helped my parents out. So I would, I also had enough to give them some money. And I paid for my driver's school and my license. So I feel like I did so much and I was only 17. So yeah, definitely taught me so much. And I'm so thankful for those experiences. Now I still remember everything that happened, and I think it's framed who I am now.
Thank you. Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Just last call. What does this say? Okay.
I like to go, Daisy.
Okay.
I'm like, I got brave. So my first job was actually through an FYI program. It was a youth program. I think it was called the YES program back then. And this was in Hatch. So I got paired at a daycare center, which was the only daycare center in Hatch at that time. So I got hired part-time, and before that, like, I had no clue I wanted to work with kids. I was terrified of little ones, especially babies. They terrified me. But through that experience, working, being placed in the childcare center, I discovered that I actually had I was good at it. And then that's how that developed into my career in early childhood. And then once the program ended, because I think it was just 6 months. It was just 6 months after that, the program ended, I got hired part-time by the child care center. So while I was going to school, to college, I was still working at the child care center.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
And I did And I would say that most, like while I was in high school, I was using that money, of course, for clothes and buy things that, you know, you want to, but also to help my parents with groceries and, you know, pay for bills. My dad was a student at the time. So it was kind of a family effort to get everyone, you know, to help with the bills.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate that. And that's actually perfect in line with what we're going to talk about today. So you all mentioned most of you mentioned like really typical youth jobs, right? When we think about where we work when we're teenagers, it's in fast food restaurants and movie theaters, right? We're babysitting. Liz talked about babysitting a lot. Tutors, right? Just like general labor workers, we're servers, hostesses, grocery stores, retail. So yeah, when we think about like where young people go to work, that's sort of where we think about like, oh, and it's, you know, what's the attitude too, and the mentality about that. Like it's good for them, right? It's good for those young people to to do some of that work. It's gonna what did Stephanie say? That learn responsibility and how to be on time, and that's sort of again like what we think about when we think about how what youth are going to be learning when they are gainfully employed, while of course while still going to school. Oops, I think I went too far. So, and then again, so why do teens work? And a lot of you also, the people who shared, gave us all the same reasons, right? To buy the things that we wanted, you know, clothing in particular sounded like food, you know, maybe somebody is paying for a car, but definitely gas, right? And insurance. And I did add technology here, you know, maybe back, you know, when most of us, I'm going to go ahead and just clump us into a group, but technology wasn't what technology is today. But people definitely, our kids, you know, young people these days, definitely technology is a big part of their day-to-day lives. And finally, to support the family, right? And so Cecilia talked about that, right? And that's in particular in our region, that is a reality of a lot of our families, is that there's an expectation that, I mean, and Stephanie sort of said the same thing too, that, you know, if I want something, or I have to fend for myself, or, you know, in order for me to have any of the things that I want, I have to go to work. So some of it's a choice, right? And then some of it isn't. And again, I don't think we should shy away from those realities in terms of our, the situation for our region. I think we should like say, okay, that is what it is. And now, you know, what can we do about it? So, so when not working, right, is not an option. Lots of times youth are going to drop out, right? And I know we've all heard all of Tracy Bryant's presentations about graduation rates, and it's up, and that all of those things are true. And there's still that 14% of young people who aren't graduating high school because they're going and getting jobs, because they can't stay in school, and they can't stay they can't stay in school full time, and they have to support their families. But specifically, where are those young people being employed, and what types of jobs are they engaged in? Does anybody want to take a stab at it? Where do we think that they're working?
I was going to say more like, oh my God, I lost my train of thought. Like hands-on stuff, building houses, things like that. I lost my train of thought at the moment. Labor type work, I'm sorry.
Right, labor, right, construction. Yeah, absolutely. Alma, I think you were going to say something, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. Like I'm thinking like oil fields, welding, things that are making them a lot of money. So then they just don't prioritize education anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. So, and do those, well, at least some of those jobs, right? So construction jobs definitely exist in our county, but oil field jobs and things like that, they'd have to leave, right? They'd have to leave the area in order to engage in that type of employment. So well, and then the other thing is in other parts of the country, right? There are community interventions, right? And so there's Youth Build, there's Job Corps, and there's other sorts of programs that are intended for youth that drop out, that don't get to finish high school for one reason or another. And so Youth Build is, and actually these are very similar. So it's, as the state, it's youth 16 to 24. And so they're either not employed and or not in school in order to qualify for that program. And then they're teaching young people like the skills for gainful employment. And the same thing for Youth Corps, except Youth Corps also, Job Corps is a residential program, right? So they actually would live in a facility that is provided by Job Corps. Now, to be honest, and I probably should know this, but I don't know if New Mexico, if we either have neither of these programs in our state. But these are like exist in places, outside of our region.
We do have Job Corps on the, I want to say like Roswell or Artesia, somewhere on that side of the area.
Okay, so we have Job Corps, but not, so not in the county, right? Which I didn't think. But in a rural area. Lori, were you gonna say something?
No.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry. But again, these two programs in particular are intended for youth who leave school and want to be employed full-time, right? They're not intended for the youth that are in school. And that's oftentimes when we think about the community interventions and like the dropout rate and how do we, what do we do? It's sort of after the fact. After they've dropped out, how do we get them back into school, or how do we get them to graduate? And then how do we get them connected to gainful employment, right? That's going to be sustainable, right? That has a living wage, as opposed to maybe doing some labor work that's could be dangerous, or working in the oil fields also, that's very dangerous, and that truthfully doesn't require a degree. And not that that's a bad job, but that's not something that could be necessarily sustainable. You don't see people in the field who are ready to retire that are working out there. So they'd have to obtain another skill to do something else later on. So my proposal, or I'm sure it's not just me, but if we focused on youth development from the get-go, right? Before they get, they not to have the opportunity to drop out, before they drop out, and not just the highest performing students, right? This is the average student that is working at Subway or working at the movie theater, or they want that little bit of money to pay for their prom dress, like you guys were talking about. I think that's actually kind of funny that two people mentioned the prom dress. So that young person, that they're going to work because they want to buy things that they want. And they're going to stay in school because that's still important to them. But what if we focus that employment on positive youth development, right? So what if instead of going to Subway or the movie theater, that they work for a local business? What if they worked for Engaged or FYI? And then along with that, though, there is a youth development, positive youth development component, right? And so I just want to talk a little bit about what positive youth development is. It's approach that engages children and youth, right, within our community. So this is, again, it's like a focus of developing our youth as opposed to just letting them out into the business world. And, you know, I don't know that the owner, you know, Alan, Mr. Mr. Allen really cares if his employees are developed into like productive, you know, human beings, or that have these soft skills that they can turn into, you know, and move into other careers, right? It's like, well, did you clean, you know, the restrooms? Is, you know, is all the money there? Like, that's probably the extent of it, right? And so if we started to engage our community and engage our youth in this way, what possibilities, right, could this really foster? What could it really look like? And again, so we're providing opportunities, we're creating positive relationships and supporting and building youth based on their strengths and their assets. And I really wanted to highlight too what Cecia, like her experience, right? Which is beautiful that just happened to be one of the experiences of the people here on this call today. Because she entered a program that introduced her to a daycare, to early childhood, you know, education, and now that's what she's doing, you know, as her career. And maybe because she said that also she is afraid of young children and babies, maybe she wouldn't have even thought about that as an opportunity because of that fear. But that was supported and fostered in that way. And so now here she is. She's a early childhood, you know, educator. So what if also then we could do this as a region, as a county, right? And create a paid teen employment program where we could all come together. Like I said, those local businesses, also the city and county government, and nonprofits. But with the intention, again, that we're doing positive youth development, that it's not just like, I, you know, got this teenager, what do I need to be, you know, what do I need to happen? Not cleaning the restroom. And maybe actually that is part of it, right? So maybe they still work at grocery stores and maybe they still work at Allen Theater, but it's not just that, right? Where it has a very specific component that where we are offering that positive youth development within that position. And so instead of just providing the intervention right after the fact, that we're intentionally developing our youth while they're in school and they're employed, knowing again that young people are they're going to look for work no matter what, right? Because mom and dad aren't paying for those prom dresses or those, you know, nights out or those movie theater or whatever else that young people are spending the money on, or those very fancy phones maybe. So they're still going to do it, right? We want to keep them in school. We want to have them focus on academics, but they're still going to go out and look for work. And there's still those businesses that are willing to employ them. So could we, you know, bring those intentions together? They want to be employed, businesses and nonprofits and the city government also want employees, but can we be intentional about how we do that in our community? So I see this as untapped potential and opportunities. So creating a coalition basically in our region of employers who are committed to positive youth development, like I said. So maybe they still are doing some of the grunt work that, you know, we want them to do as young people, like, you, you have to, you know, clean the toilets or do some hard labor, but there is some development pieces in there, right? And then we put some safeguards because we also know, right? We don't want young people to be exploited. We don't want long hours, where that is jeopardizing their academics. You know, Cecia said that too. So it was a program, right, that she entered through FYI. But could we expand that to a whole region? There would be monitoring, they'd have like navigators. And I think, right, and I guess in terms of like my theory of change, this would really change our region, because instead of, hopefully, right, instead of some of those young people dropping out, or instead of us, you know, just saying okay to young people working at those fast food jobs or at the grocery store, something like that, you know, we're really guiding them towards something that could benefit them into the future, right? So yeah, I'd really like to hear from other people though too, like what are your thoughts about this in terms of the possibility, and what other possibilities could you see from that? Mike, if you want to, I think Mike, you could go ahead and read your comment. And we could even talk about that.
Yeah, Mike Milam's comment.
Yes, sorry, Mike Milam.
Sure. Mike, do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it out?
No, I'm on mute purposely. Nobody likes to hear 3 dogs fighting.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead and read it then. Mike was pointing out that a major challenge for high school students and graduates is knowing where to find information about jobs. I think we've seen that too. There are a few organizations in our region that focus on positive youth development. North of Burque, there are more. On the east side, there are a few positive youth development is historically a provider-based service, and the very little exists in the public sector. Boys and Girls Club and Big Brothers Big Sisters are 2 privates that realistically prep kids for work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And Ryan, I see your hand up. Did you want to make a comment on that, or do you have something else you would like to add?
Sure. I think, you know, it's interesting because the county has this big internship program that's coming up for high school youth, which is really exciting. But what you're saying, it's not connected to that youth development piece, and it's also for one short amount of time in a summer. You know, I think that it would be really great to have some more regular opportunities for youth that are coupled with the important youth development piece to help them with the learning of soft skills, to help them with the and I think that some of that exists with ACE program and things like that within our public schools, but those only have a certain capacity for students, and not all of those students get, or I would say not maybe your average student that would work at Allen Theaters or wherever maybe gets that important support that they could be getting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mari Flores. Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if that's something on your side or.
It doesn't look like you're on mute, Maria, but we can't hear you.
No. Probably your microphone. Maybe you want to type it in the chat and we could voice it. Yeah, okay. Awesome. All right, so yeah, I just want to remind, so again, positive youth development, a service delivery approach that engages children and youth within their communities, schools, organizations, peer groups, and families, right? That's productive and constructive, recognizes, utilizes, and enhances youth strengths and promotes positive outcomes for youth. Yeah, so that's a different, again, that's like a different mindset, right? About employment, because it's not just about, you know, a job and getting money, you know, and just paying our young people for their labor. It is about really like through that employment, could there be something a little different where we all share the goal, right, of youth, positive youth development, so that it's just, again, so that it's not just a job, right? It's something that leads to something else. And I'd really like, again, to highlight Cecia's experience, because although it was a summer, sounded like it was a short, or you said, I think Cecia, you said 6 months. It was a short job, but it actually led to something else that led to something else, right? It allowed her to support her during her college years. And that really like set her up for success in the early childhood education field. So could we do that? Could that be where the goal is, and not just like, okay, well, go file these things, you know, go clean this, go clean that. I see you're shaking your head, Michelle. Did you have anything you want to add?
Sure, yeah, and then I want to see if Mrs. Flores maybe was going to type something in the chat. There it is.
Right. So I've heard 4 or 3 programs now, right? So there's ACE program, I've heard Excel, the county has an intern program, and then FYI have the YES program. So could we get those connected? Could we get those connected with a very specific goal of youth development? But go ahead, Michelle.
Yes, and you know, with the lab, we have such a tiny group right now, but for us, our foundation is positive youth development, and we really take that notion of the youth strengths and we just amplify it tremendously, because youth are not only critiquing media, but they're producing media to shift the narrative around youth. And so the podcast, our radio hour, they're just super impactful in a lot of different ways for the youth that are involved. Hands-on, being live on the radio, that's intense, you know, and then producing the audio pieces that get out there publicly. And then media pieces as well. We're critiquing the education system. We have our public awareness campaign about equity in education. And so the youth are really, we're taking that notion of their strengths to another level where they are actually impacting the environment, maybe at the local level, very small, maybe in the city, maybe even in the state. So that's kind of the lab's model. And we're doing it on a very small scale. But I just know that young people, they want to make a difference in the community. So I wonder if that's another element on positive youth development, is making sure that we can provide those opportunities. But in some cases we can't, like some of what they do is more localized in an agency. You know what I mean? It benefits the agency, maybe not the larger community.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. And I think that's amazing. Yeah, and like you said, it's benefiting the community, right? That's going to be that's definitely a big benefit. And so just put in the chat from Mike, I'll just go ahead and read your comment. So in the literature, right? So positive youth development is more feasible and effective in urban centers than in rural. The rural states, agriculture has more adult support and help. That's so true. And urban centers provide a nexus where public and private agencies are welcomed under the umbrella. But grants and foundations are the source of, right, sustainability. Absolutely. And I think that that's part of, and that's really why I was really happy to be invited to talk about this, right? Because that's part of my goal in terms of Empowerment Congress, is just really to start having these conversations and seeing what can we actually do as as a community, as a region, to change, so not only, like Michelle was talking about, change the narrative, but actually do things in a different way, and not be reserved to saying, well, we're rural, or well, we're poor, or well, you know, we're and then list all the barriers and obstacles, right? And say, okay, let's look at our strengths and what can we do, and how can we change that, and how can we do things more collaboratively? And I think that's a big piece too, in terms of the comments, and just knowing that there's this program, right? And they're all acting independently on their own. And if, you know, as engaged as their collective impact, like, could we come together and move a vision like that forward as a whole? Go ahead, Mike.
I've been doing this a long time in Las Cruces area in southern New Mexico. We tend in our region to think that keeping kids busy and out of trouble is developing them. Adults, by and large, and the public sector are not engaged in what we have grown to know as positive youth development. The business sector, the public sector have their hands on the potential solutions, but there's no incentive for them to do it. How do you take a high school student who's very good in government but doesn't want to go to college and get them interested in public sector administration? How do you do that? Where's the tip off? Who's participating and waving the flag above that kid's head and saying, pick him, pick him? We don't do that well here in the South. Sorry, guys, we don't do it well. Selectively, we have access to funding, which allows us to take initiatives and share those initiatives with other entities that are interested. But New Mexico is PYD poor. But in New Mexico, north of I-40, PYD is more successful. The rural areas suck. They can't do it. COVID proved that, beat us in the head with it. We had good programs starting up, and COVID took the legs out from under them, and they're going to have to rebuild. Same thing happened in 2008 when 32 nonprofits left New Mexico.
That was what year, Mike?
Say again?
What year was it the 32 nonprofits left?
The Great Recession. It killed us. 32 nonprofits went out of business. So this is a pony that we can ride. We have ridden it before. We know how to do it. We know where the stirrups are. We know where the saddle is. We don't have to recreate the horse. We just need to teach people how to ride again. And I am an advocate for PYD. I love what Michelle is doing with Lab. I love what Roberta Rael is doing up north in Albuquerque with Generation Justice. I love the potential I see when high school kids in Santa Teresa are mentored by university students on life after high school, when their eyes light up. This is not a new horse. We just need to teach new people how to ride. And it's possible. We've been there. We need to get back.
Yeah, and if I may build on that too. So that's interesting, Erica, because I tried to connect the lab through the workforce development, and I talked to different people over there, and I was never able to get anything set up so that the lab could connect with more youth and have that funding stream not just be private foundation dollars. So that didn't work. And then Mike, in terms of other PYD, I think La Semilla Food Center and some of the businesses that are looking at sustainable farming practices and local, our food ecosystem, I think that's ripe for some PYD. I think there's a group in Anthony as well, the Anthony Farm, and then La Semilla, I don't know. But those groups, just wonderful opportunities. But yeah, you're right. the PYD is definitely stronger up north. And even some of those groups, though, New Mexico Forum for Youth and Community, it dissolved in about, I think it was 6 years ago, 7 years ago, it went away. Maybe, and okay, yeah, so that was, I think it was defunded under Martinez. It might have actually been like 10 years ago or 11. So good points.
Go ahead, Mike. I think you have, unless somebody else wants to, I think we're in the Q&A portion of the of the presentation. So we started a little early, but I think that's fine. I think we're going to have a rich discussion about what are some of the possibilities.
Nice and organic Q&A and discussion, we just went right into it, huh?
Yeah.
It occurs to me that, with everything you're talking about, like, I think a lot of us have seen that we have different elements or different pieces that if we could find a way to mold them together or take them to the next step, because I think about, like, with what you're talking about with the Workforce Talent Collaborative, Tracy worked with all those, with a bunch of different, the 8 sectors here that were identified as, these sectors in Doña Ana County lead to well-paying jobs. And we anticipate they'll be thriving sectors in this area for a while. But they did all that work with those employers in those 8 industries specifically and looked at, like, what is it that those employers are saying they're needing? Because there's the, excuse me, there's the technical skills that are specific to any given industry, but then there were a lot of commonalities too, and a lot of those commonalities centered around, like, the soft skills and the, the things that you're talking about. And so, going back to what Mike said about, like, there's no incentive for people to do this, but there's got to be a way to tie these things together. Like, some of the incentive is inherent, right? Workforce keeps saying we need workers who are ready to do this. And so, in some ways we see that forward movement in our state, because 15 years ago, you didn't hear the business sector talking about early childhood. But in the last, 5 to 7 years, you've seen early childhood become much more of a, like, non-political issue, because people across the board recognize we have to invest in early childhood, and for the workforce to recognize those soft skills you're talking about, they start in early childhood. So, like, we're seeing it. Some of it's happening, but, like, what would need to happen here on the local level to take all these different pieces of youth development and workforce and things that are, in collaboration and things that are happening to form something like what you're talking about, with, like, a coalition of employers who are really committed to not just providing, like, an internship opportunity, because what you're talking about really takes that and then takes it kind of to the next level, right? And so, I don't know, in my brain, I just see all these different, like, pieces that we have that are just, they're not cohesed. They're not cohesed.
Right, they're not connected. Yeah, and I hear, Mike and Michelle, just in terms of organizations that did this work and now are, have disappeared into the ether, and what a disservice. And I think that's a big piece of sustainability, right? And why, I feel like in order to do this work well, and for it to be sustainable, it'd have to be regional, definitely a coalition type, the collective impact type of model. Because if we just allow, or not allow, but if one organization takes it on, there's just lots of risk there of not getting enough funding, or of other things happening. Kimmy, it looks like you were unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, and this is building off of a question that was submitted in advance of today's presentation, but how do these programs fit in with school and family commitments and kind of the rest, and kids being kids? I mean, they still need to go play and hang out with their friends and not just be worried about school and work.
Yeah, well, and so the positive youth development model does take that into consideration, right? And that's why it's not just a job. It's not like, hey, where you got your boss hanging over you, you got to work 40 hours or something like that. So would employers that are committed to that, so that there would be restricted hours, they'd obviously get a wage that was at a minimum, right? A minimum wage. But that it would take that into consideration. And the idea again is about development. It's not just about them being employed. Yeah, did anybody else want to share? I guess we have only 5 minutes left. I just realized that.
One thought, and that's that just hearing different things about the Department of Workforce Solutions over the years. So our state Department of Workforce Solutions, I think for the last maybe year, they've been looking at possibly restructuring the regional boards. But one of the themes that comes up repeatedly, at least for our Southwest board, is that there's workforce money every year that doesn't get spent and ends up going back. And I wonder about, if you want to do something like this coalition of employers, like, I mean, certainly I think that like the Success Partnership would love to partner with that too, but like maybe there's a way to make a proposal to the Department of Workforce Solutions for what you're doing, because their youth employment funds focus on age 14 to 24, which is probably a right and a good wheelhouse potentially for what you're talking about. But maybe it's a matter of, that could be a potential funding source to say, hey, do this pilot program. New Mexico's flush with money right now also. So I think things that are pilots are probably attractive because you're not using those, the bad words, recurring funds. So.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a possibility. Because that is definitely probably one of the bigger challenges to implement this would be the funding piece. And then the gathering piece, right? To get those employers together and have that commitment, and knowing that we're all on the same sort of path toward that goal. I think Maria put a comment in the chat, bring all these groups together. So yes, find a way to work together along with the coalition of employers. Yeah. That's the bigger piece. And though, I would say, I hear you, Mike, too, in terms of an incentive. They don't have an incentive, but if this means that as they grow and mature and continue on and go to school, that's all future labor, laborers, if we're going to put it in business terms, as opposed to, people graduating from college and then leaving the region, right? So keep them here. Like if you work here in high school, you're going to have a job and, after college.
Yes, and I think one other thing is really just rethinking deficit thinking. I think that Mike said, we don't do it very good down here, some of this stuff. And I think we have some deficit thinking that's really entrenched about different groups among us, including young people. And that deficit thinking keeps us from really tapping into their ideas and their insights and creativity, and just treating them like they don't have anything to contribute, which is completely wrong. So I think we all can start that whole, that kind of pushing against the deficit thinking that's real overt and covert too.
Thank you. Are there any other ideas or comments or thoughts? No? All right, well, I think that I'm done. I wasn't sure, is this an hour? An hour and a half?
Yeah, it's an hour.
Okay, so yeah, so there's a minute till
perfectly-
3, so I was like, okay, I guess
on
it's my
schedule.
time. Thank you all, though. Thank you for the open and honest feedback and discussion. And I hope this is just the beginning of us working together to actually, create something for our young people, because they deserve more. They just deserve more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's give a big thank you, big hand to Daisy. I think you gave us all a lot to think about. So thank you so much for your time. And then Kimmy, I think you're gonna close us out, right?
No, was it me? If it is, well, thank you everybody for coming. Oh, it was me. I'm so sorry I missed that. So our next session is on Tuesday, March 31st from 1 to 2 o'clock. And we'll be hearing from Erica Sarova, our program director for the Center of Community Analysis at NMSU. And she will be talking about how school districting perpetuates segregation. So that email will be coming out soon to register for that. I'm sure it will be an amazing discussion, as they always are when Erica leads them. And thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Daisy, for presenting today. And we will see you all at the next session.